Welcome, Gun Runner.
Back in 2022, I made a video looking at failed consoles that never made it out of Japan, and it proved rather popular. So I ended up making a series of videos that also looked at failed consoles that never made it out of other regions too, like America, Asia and Europe, as well as several follow-ups to those videos 2 years later. And now I'm back again with a second sequel to that original video, because believe it or not, there are still more consoles I can cover. If you were wondering, the first episode looked at the Bandai Supervision, Gakken Compact TV Boy, Nichibatsu My Vision, Casio PV1000 and the NEC Super Graphics, with the second one chronicling the history of the Casio Lupi, Tomy Pewter, Bandai Playdia, NEC PCFX and FM Towns Marty. But before we look at the next set of systems, I want to add one important piece of information, because you might have noticed that I dropped the failed part of the video title, and I've done that on purpose, because several systems in this new list were in fact regarded as being quite successful in their homeland, despite never making their way over to the West. Now this might make you think that this new batch of consoles will be a bit more obvious, and not so obscure, but I think you're still going to be surprised by a lot of what follows, and will learn a lot too. And hopefully this episode goes down as well as the first two, and you never know, I might just be able to squeeze out one more in the future.
Cassette Vision ギャラクシアンが4つの攻撃パターンで総攻撃スペースシャトルドッキングやった5つのカセットが揃ったエポック社のテレビゲームカセットビジョンカセットいろいろカセットビジョンモンスターマンションパクパクモンスターギャラクシアンまだまだあるよ君はいくつ持ってるエポック社のカセットビジョン
One period in Japanese gaming history that always seems to get completely ignored is the pre-Famicom era. It's almost like there was no video game industry in Japan at all until Nintendo came along. But that couldn't be further from the truth, as prior to the Famicom arriving, there were some really interesting systems on the market in the land of the rising sun. Of those, there is no doubting that the Epoch Cassette Vision and its successor the Super Cassette Vision were the most important. In fact, at one point, Epoch held just over 70% of the console market in Japan. Though they started off producing various Pong clones as early as 1975, it was the original Cassette Vision that was Epoch's big breakthrough. Released in July 1981, the cassette part of the name didn't refer to tapes, rather ROM cartridges, as in the early days of gaming, the two terms were almost interchangeable, mostly due to early cartridges looking a lot like 8-track tapes. This simple console had just 12 games released for it, controls that were built into the console itself, and it connected to a standard TV set. The Cassette Vision didn't actually have a CPU or any other chips inside of it, all these were contained within the cartridges themselves, with the main unit just offering a way to play them. This was actually very common in early Japanese consoles, as I explained with the Bandai Supervision in the first Failed Japan episode. Despite its limitations, Epoch managed to sell just over 400,000 consoles in the 3 years it was on sale, a pretty impressive feat at this time. But due to the limitations of the Cassette Vision and also the huge expense of putting all the hardware into the carts, Epoch decided to go back to the drawing board and create a new super version of their console. Unfortunately, by the time the much delayed Super Cassette Vision was ready to hit the market, both the Nintendo Famicom and Sega SG-1000 had arrived. It still managed to have some limited success however, despite sitting in third place sales wise, and had a total of 30 games released for the console before it was discontinued in 1987, including big name titles like Boulder Dash, Miner 2049er, Mappy, Doraemon and Pole Position 2. This next entry is the only handheld in this list, and also a system that I've covered in depth on this channel before, as you actually voted for it to get its very own amazing facts video some time ago. So for that reason, I won't go into too much detail here, and have linked that video in the description for those who haven't seen it and want to know more. But I will give you a pretty concise overview of what the WonderSwan offered and why it remained a Japanese exclusive system. Designed by none other than Nintendo stalwart Gunpei Yokoi, the Bandai WonderSwan was officially unveiled in Tokyo on the 8th of October 1998, with the company promising a 30-hour plus battery life, low retail price, and a launch lineup of over 50 games. People were surprised to see a company like Bandai going up against the might of Nintendo, and were even more shocked when they learned it would have a monochrome screen, although Bandai later revised this, of course. But they were also pleased to see a genuine alternative to Nintendo's more family-focused brand, and the WonderSwan already seemed somewhat more grown up, from its sleek design and mysterious name alone. The WonderSwan launched on March the 4th, 1999, and apparently Bandai chose that name to highlight its aesthetics and technical capabilities, because in Japan the swan is recognised as an elegant bird with powerful legs that aid its graceful swimming. It remained on the market for 4 years, however it could have gone wrong quite early, as people were a bit bemused by the monochrome screen at a time when colour handhelds had very much become the norm. Bandai remained confident that the WonderSwan with its black and white screen would still perform well in the market, citing the success of the original Game Boy when compared to its colour screen competitors like the Atari Lynx and Sega Game Gear. And they weren't completely wrong either, as initially the WonderSwan sold very well indeed, but once Nintendo dropped the price of their new colour handheld, sales of Bandai's portable pretty much dried up overnight. In response to this, the company went on to work on a new colour version of the WonderSwan and released it just in time for the all-important Christmas period in the year 2000, nearly 2 years after the launch of the original unit. This new model was 100% backwards compatible with the original WonderSwan and used the exact same design, just adding a new screen and an updated graphics chip that could display up to 241 colours out of a palette of 4096 with up to 28 sprites per line. A big improvement on the 8 shades of grey found in the original WonderSwan. This also went through several revisions of its own, most notably the WonderSwan Crystal with its vastly improved screen. Although Bandai did plan to release it in the West, even signing a deal with Mattel to do just that, the surprise release of the Game Boy Advance with its huge technical superiority over the WonderSwan caused a very quick rethink, and both Bandai and Mattel decided the idea was destined to failure and ended up leaving the console in Japan. They were soon proved right, as the GBA went on to dominate the handheld sector, causing the discontinuation of the WonderSwan as well as Nintendo's other big rival in that sector, the SNK Neo Geo Pocket. Whilst the Sega Pico is not particularly well known, it was actually a very successful venture for the Japanese giants. This is probably because it wasn't designed or marketed as a traditional home console, being envisaged as an educational device for children aged 3 to 7. First released in Japan in June 1993, the Pico is closely based on the Mega Drive hardware internally, but the external design is very much reminiscent of a laptop computer. Rather than a joypad, the Pico also utilised its own unique control options in the form of a Magic Pen stylus, mouse or built-in buttons. Games were played from more traditional cartridges, however, that Sega referred to as storyware. These edutainment-focused games featured many of Sega's own mascots, such as Sonic the Hedgehog and Echo the Dolphin, as well as other popular franchises such as Winnie the Pooh, Donald Duck and even Lego. With sales of 3.5 million worldwide, the Pico was considered a huge success for Sega, especially in Japan where the vast majority of systems were sold, and stayed on the market until 2005 when it was finally replaced with a new console that was originally called the Advanced Pico Beena, but then later referred to simply as the Beena when subsequent revisions of this new hardware arrived. The name of the new console was chosen to sound like the first syllables of Be Natural, a common type of naming convention in Japan, but in this case the strange naming didn't really matter to those of us in the West, because despite the success of the original Pico console, Sega decided against releasing the Beena outside of Japan, much to people's surprise. In terms of what the new Pico offered, it was more of the same really, but with less focus on the storybooks and more on genuine educational programs based around key subjects like maths, languages and music. What makes the decision to keep this system in Japan even more baffling is that the Pico Beena was an even bigger success than the original model, selling 4.1 million units in 6 years before being discontinued in 2011. At this point, the Beena was succeeded with both a new console called the Pico, which is more like a tablet and relies on you having an internet connection, and also a mobile app that can be downloaded to your existing phone or tablet called Beena. Both of these remain Japanese only too, with no plans for Sega to relaunch the Pico brand in the West at all. Released in 1986, the sharp twin Famicom combined both the regular Nintendo Famicom console and a Famicom Disk System add-on. It was officially licensed from the Big N. In fact, there was plans with Nintendo to produce a very similar console themselves before their licenses to Sharp, and it went through 2 different generations. The first model was available in 2 different colours, red with black highlights and black with red highlights. The Model 2 is released in 1987 with a slightly different case design, turbo controllers and 2 slightly different colour schemes, black with green highlights and red with beige highlights. For those who don't know, the existing Famicom Disk System already featured extra technology that upgraded the main console in the form of an enhanced 6-channel PCM sound chip and an extra 40k of RAM, with 32k reserved for the disc cache itself. So the twin Famicom retained all these features, as well as adding improved audio output, better visual output and a new BIOS too. However, the twin Famicom could only be switched between playing cartridges or loading discs. There was absolutely no way to combine the two. This design decision seems utterly ludicrous, as there was so much potential that could have been exploited from simply using discs to save your game to using the medium to deliver extra content, a retro version of DLC if you will. Like Nintendo's Disk System, the Sharp Twin Famicom was only ever released in Japan with no Western NES version planned. It was only produced for 2 years, 1986 and 1987, before being discontinued due to Nintendo choosing to drop the Famicom Disk System add-on completely and game production with it, due to the rampant piracy. Because of the unit's high price and short lifespan, it never sold in large numbers and is now extremely sought after by collectors around the world. When we think about the biggest and best arcade companies ever, then I'm sure that Capcom is one of the first names that springs to mind. From the company's first big hit in 1984 with 1942, right through to their modern console releases of today, there isn't a moment that Capcom haven't been at the forefront of gaming. In fact, with titles like Street Fighter II, Final Fight, Mega Man, Resident Evil, Commando, Strider and Ghouls and Ghosts in their back catalogue, a pretty convincing argument could be made that they're the greatest games producers of all time. Keen to find a way to exploit their arcade success in the home, in 1994 Capcom released the Power System Changer, or CPS Changer as it's also known, to expectant eyes. This system was very much inspired by the Neo Geo from Capcom's then big rivals SNK, the very first console that actually offered identical gaming in the home to what you saw in the arcades. The CPS Changer was basically an encased jammer adapter that could be connected to a standard TV and used to play all their well-known CPS based arcade games of the day. The unit featured its own proprietary connector, so you couldn't just connect any old arcade board and needed to buy specific CPS Changer cartridges, much like the Neo Geo. There was a lot of early excitement over the console, and Capcom were promising to make all their big games available for it, but there was one big problem. Both the console and the games were hugely expensive, leaving them out of the reach of most players. This huge expense also put paid to any hope of it being released in the West, where consumers were generally more price conscious than their compatriots in Japan. Despite Capcom's promises otherwise, several CPS Changer games actually lacked features when compared to their arcade counterparts too, especially the final release Street Fighter Zero. These slow sales meant only 11 games were ever released to the CPS Changer, all of which was some type of fighting game, and the system was discontinued just 1 year after launch, with Capcom never attempting to enter the console sector again.
どこまで強くなるのか。 ストファイター2ターボスーパーファミコンで新発売 Capcom.
And that rounds up my look at another 5 consoles that never made it out of Japan. Did you get excited about the announcement of any of these back in the day and get sad when they never made it to the West, or do you think they were right to leave them in Japan? I always love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube members for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following people in particular for their much appreciated pledges: D. Vaughan, Albert Davis, Richard Baker, Martin Wiggins, Peter Grantham, Bernard Santu, Mins, Classic Gamer 74, Josh Hartman, Dennis Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, Teba Kitsune, Grady Haynes, Paul Daniel, Seth A. Robinson, Climatorn, Carl Olsen, Mark Strickland, Big Chuzzle, Cole Cloping, Black Siren, John Alberino, Krispy Kreme, Justin Cooney, Luke Boynton, Sarah B, Richard Tate, Tellboy 2011, Tiago Silva, James Welch, Wesley K, Hunter Bungay, Cellphone Smartphone, Glacier 9 and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support this channel, you can now join as a member of as little as £2 a month, where you'll get access to exclusive videos and updates and much more besides. Just click the button on my community page to get started. My Patreon is also still available if you prefer to support me in other ways too. I've been the Laird, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.